Alright guys, welcome to the channel, this tactical intellectual channel. I will be doing something a little bit different, a little bit new, out of the ordinary. The format will be more of the reaction style as opposed to reading the excerpt out of a book and giving some comments. Now, what will the topic be about? Well, it's going to be about steppe culture, the Russian steppes over in Europe, the people of the steppe region, the culture, customs, traditions, etc. that they came up with. I did find all of this fascinating while I was on YouTube searching for content and information to go towards these presentations here. Now, I found people who had basically everything I was looking for, and I didn't want to basically parrot everything, so let me just show their works, and I'll definitely link these videos up in my description page. So again, the topic is steppe people and their migrations. This is the basic acquaintance on this topic. It's going to be broken up into the introduction to these people. We're going to show genetic evidence of who these people are, their DNA and all that stuff, and then the outcome of the migration of these steppe people. So without further ado, let's go ahead and go into the reaction portion. Guys, enjoy. The introduction so that you guys can be aware and know the ins and outs of these people known as the Yamnaya. So let's go ahead and start the video.
The Yamnaya feature in my Bronze Age fantasy series Gods of Bronze. You can get your copy of the novella The Wolf God for free by signing up to my email newsletter. The link is in the description. The Yamnaya culture was a Copper Age to early Bronze Age archaeological culture of the Pontic steppe, north of the Black Sea, dating to 3300 to 2600 BC.
Alright, so you see the geography of all of this. The Yamnaya culture in red, and then you see, as he said, it was near the Pontic area, of course on the steppe, and near the Black Sea region. So let's go ahead and continue.
Its name derives from its characteristic burial tradition. Yamnaya is a Russian adjective that means related to pits, and these people used to bury their dead in tumuli, the famous kurgans, which we call barrows or burial mounds in Britain. These contained simple pit chambers beneath the mounds. In life, they practiced transhumance, a type of pastoralism or nomadism where they spent winters in the wooded river valleys and summers out on the grasslands with their herds.
So in the book Environment, Race and Migration, I do have information, more in-depth information on their migratory patterns that I will introduce in later video presentations.
The Yamnaya culture is identified with the late Proto-Indo-Europeans and is the strongest candidate for the original homeland of the Proto-Indo-European language, of which English is just one of many descendants. They possibly invented the wheel, and they were the first, or almost, to domesticate and ride horses.
We don't know that for sure. That's just a guesstimation.
And they invented four-wheeled, ox-drawn, axled wagons that enabled them to drive herds of cattle across the steppes and carry enough water and shelter with them to do so. Because of these innovations, they were probably the first people in history to solve the problem of living out on the arid, barren grasslands of the Eurasian steppe, rather than always in the river valleys that cross it. The remnants of their camps, found by archaeologists, suggest that they wintered in river valleys, using the trees there for fuel to keep warm, and took their cattle onto the steppe in summer for grazing, and each group would have had their own territory. They ate horses, cattle, sheep, pigs, and also hunted sager antelope and other animals of the steppe and river valleys. We're talking about the great valleys like the Don and the Volga and their many tributaries.
Now, knowing what you know about early Neolithic Russia, you know who was in the area first, what types of people made up the, composition of that Russian area, this area here.
They also drank milk and ate butter and cheese. But adult lactose tolerance, lactose persistence, probably wasn't that common amongst these people until later. Some Yamnaya did a bit of farming, growing millet and amaranth, but it seems that it wasn't a huge part of their diet. Thanks perhaps to their incredibly tough lifestyle, their warlike patriarchal culture, and their high-protein diet, they were big people with large, robust skulls and big bones. And archaeologists immediately recognise their remains in excavations, versus those of the Neolithic farmers of Europe that they replaced or merged with, who were smaller people with slighter skulls and gracile frames.
You see that distinction there that was made. These Yamnaya steppe culture people, they were larger than the Neolithic European people. And I mean, hey, I've been doing so many presentations on these Neolithic early Europeans, the first ones, and we all know that they were melanated folks, Australo Negroes, and the regular conventional, different groups of conventional Negroes, basically straight hair, coarse hair, curly hair, all that type of melanated people. And then this Yamnaya element came in.
The combination of physical and social and technological traits meant that the Yamnaya were incredibly successful people.
Take a look at this screen here. You can screen record it on your own device, phone, or PC. And just look at all of this right here, Caucasus Mountains, and then the direction that they went into, and then what it has to say right there. I mean, all of this is interesting here, all of this information here. So let's go ahead and proceed.
So much so that they expanded out of the steppes, along with other related peoples, and into Neolithic Europe.
All right, I just had to pause for those who wanted to take a screenshot.
Different regions of old Europe experienced different levels of interaction with these expanding Yamnaya and other steppe people.
That's an important fact that is lost when we talk about this historical stuff in the DNA and migrations and different peoples. Neolithic Europe, they had their own culture, but then it was interrupted and it amalgamated into something else. Now, there's a point that I want to make concerning Africa. Now, that's why I make a distinction between the people, the melanated people in Europe, and then the ones that you see in Africa, because those Yamnaya people, they didn't go deep into Africa and change things up like they did to Europe. I'll have more on that as I come out with more video presentations, but let's go ahead and proceed.
In the early 20th century, it was imagined that they had swept down from the plains, conquering all before them like some Bronze Age Mongols or Scythians. And it's understandable because that is somewhat shown in the archaeological evidence, where the old cultural artifacts disappear when those of the Yamnaya show up. But that view of great armies of horsemen is anachronistic. There wasn't anything like that until the Iron Age, thousands of years later. The Yamnaya expansion was more complicated than that, and there were different interactions in different places and times, and it's not yet well understood exactly how it worked on the ground. But much of the expansion from the Black Sea all the way eventually to the British Isles was driven by bands of young men leaving their clan to raid and dominate others beyond.
Important fact that he said, you're dealing with different waves of migration at different times. So like one migration may have been peaceful, and then another one 150 years later could have been conquest and genocidal. So keep that in mind right there.
Over hundreds of years and many generations, this drove the expansion west and east. Watch my video on the Kourios to hear more about that. There were also rarer, great folk migrations, where whole peoples seemed to up and move thousands of miles very quickly to as far away ultimately as India and even to the edge of China, bringing the technology of horse riding, wagons, chariots, and bronze working to those places for the first time.
All right, I had to pause it for those who wanted to take a screenshot and digest this information that you see thoroughly.
The Yamnaya and their descendants replaced and merged with the earlier peoples of Europe, so that European people look and speak how they do today, because these wagon-driving, horse-riding warriors are our ancestors. If your paternal haplogroup, your Y haplogroup, is R1A or R1B, for example, mine is R1B, then it's likely that your ancestors include the Yamnaya. R1b is the most common Y haplogroup in Europe, carried by over 110 million European males. It's most common in the British Isles. So for many of us, if you trace our lineages back through father to son, all the way back 5,000 years, we would find that these men of the Yamnaya are quite literally our forefathers. And that is in part why I wanted to recreate these people and show their impact on the world in Gods of Bronze. Thank you for watching. Please do like, share and subscribe.
All right, so enough of that. That was a very interesting video that this guy did. I will link his video in my description here. So let's go ahead and go into the second part, the genetic evidence.
What are the origins of Indo-European DNA, and are they part of your genetic heritage? In one of my last videos, I looked at some of the properties of Indo-European DNA and how it spread across Eurasia with the expansion of various archaeological cultures, most notably the Yamnaya culture of the Pontic-Caspian steppe, with many other cultures related to the Yamnaya, such as the corded ware culture. In this video, I want to look at the genetic origins of the Yamnaya people themselves and the steppe ancestry they spread.
So that right there is your answer for those people that are thinking due to a bad narrative that, hey, Palito people, hey, we've always been in Europe. We're native to Europe. No, you came from somewhere else. Let's go ahead and move forward.
It's not all good news, however, and at the end of this video, I will discuss how the spread of Yamnaya DNA across Eurasia may have increased the chances of developing a debilitating disease.
Hey, take a screenshot of this screen right here.
Now, on a high level, genetic studies have suggested that the people of the Yamnaya culture can be modelled as a genetic admixture between a population related to Eastern hunter-gatherers and people related to hunter-gatherers from the Caucasus, with additional admixture from Anatolian, Levantine, or early European farmers.
All right, so that little conglomeration or amalgamation of people, I will have to discuss all of that later on, because, you know, the more you find out, the more questions that pops up, and, you know, it's the rabbit hole effect. But right now, this is the introduction to these people, Palito people, that is.
The Yamnaya are considered Western steppe herders.
Hey, take a screenshot of this information here. You see EHG, then light/intermediate skin, the variable eye colors, and this is all the Western steppe herders right here. See light/intermediate skin, brown eyes, then the origin of the blue eyes, and light skin, all of that. It's good information.
Haplogroup R1b, specifically the Z2103 subclad of R1b L23, is the most common Y DNA haplogroup found amongst the Yamnaya specimens. Now let's look at this in a little more detail. A study published earlier this year in Nature looked at the population genomics of post-glacial Western Eurasia.
Hey, I'm going to try to have a link to this article that he's referencing in my description. Let me move back a little bit so you can get the full idea. All right.
Detail. A study published earlier this year in Nature looked at the population genomics of post-glacial Western Eurasia. The authors begin by noting that Yamnaya ancestry, that is steppe ancestry, has been characterised broadly as a mix between Eastern hunter-gatherer ancestry and Caucasus hunter-gatherer, formed in a hypothetical admixture between a northern steppe source and a southern Caucasus source. However, the exact origins of these ancestry sources have not been identified. To get more detailed results, they studied the genomes of 1600 ancient people and found that the steppe ancestry composition can be modelled as a mixture of around 65% ancestry related to hunter-gatherer genomes from the Middle Don River region, and around 35% ancestry related to hunter-gatherers from the Caucasus. Thus, Middle Don hunter-gatherers, who already carried ancestry related to Caucasus hunter-gatherers, serve as a hitherto unknown proximal source for the majority ancestry contribution into the Yamnaya-related genomes. Therefore, the majority of the steppe or Yamnaya-related ancestry stems from a group of hunter-gatherers who lived around the Don River region in modern-day Russia, close to the border with Ukraine, who lived there around 7,500 years ago.
So I had these Russian presentations, and I do go into I want to say environment, race, and migration, and what's the other book? I can't think of it right now, but yeah, we actually go over the sources or origins of the first peoples to live there, and it was like the Australo Negroes, and then regular groups of Negroes, basically straight hair and curly hair, and of course haired melanated people.
Now that we know a little more about the genetic origins of the Yamnaya people, what modern populations of Europe are most closely related to the Yamnaya? Well, a study from 2015 touched on this aspect. If we look at this table from the study, we can see that Norwegian people have the highest Yamnaya-like ancestry, followed by Lithuanian, Estonian, Icelandic, and then Scottish people. Imagine that, the Declaration of Arbroath, one of the most famous documents in Scottish history written in the 14th century, says that the Scots were originally from Greater Scythia, which...
Alright, I'm going to rewind it back a little bit, but this Declaration of Arbroath, I do have an explanation going back to Richie's book. And I'm definitely going to... hold on, let me see if I can get that book right quick. All right, Ancient and Modern Britons, Volume 1 by David McRitchie. He explains that over time, the people that migrated into Scotland and I guess supplanted or amalgamated with the native population, they over time became known to be Scotsmen themselves. So I think he said like there was a distinguishing factor at the beginning, but then pretty soon, I guess a semantic shift occurred, and these Yamnaya ancestry people, they adopted their names Scotsmen or Scottish, but they were from, like you say, Greater Scythia.
Which is an area just north of the Black Sea where the Yamnaya lived thousands of years ago, and the genetic research seems to suggest there is actually some truth to this. As is often the case, origin stories usually have seeds of truth in them. But what features did the Yamnaya bring with them? Now, the spread of steppe-related ancestry across Europe through the Yamnaya culture and other associated cultures probably increased the height of Europeans. A study looked at this, the impact of the Indo-European migrations on Neolithic Denmark, and the results indicate an increase in height, consistent with ancient steppe individuals being predicted taller than average European Neolithic individuals before the steppe migrations. Now, height is generally considered a good thing, but it wasn't all rosy. There is emerging evidence that the Yamnaya migration, along with associated migrations across Eurasia, introduced new genetics that increased the chance of a certain disease developing. Multiple sclerosis, or MS, is a neuroinflammatory and neurodegenerative disease that is prevalent in Northern Europe.
All right, another screenshot opportunity here. Main symptoms of multiple sclerosis. This is the, I guess, end result of these problems and ailments that these steppe ancestry people have. And I guess it's their descendants in Europe continue this, I guess, degenerative tradition. All right, so let's go ahead and go on.
This map shows a general geographical pattern of the risk of MS developing, with blue and red being high risk, and is quite closely correlated with countries which have strong Indo-European ancestry, or who are descended from these populations at least, i.e. a lot of people in America and Canada have European ancestry. Now, a study published in Nature earlier this year looked at how the elevated genetic risk for MS emerged in steppe pastoralist populations.
I'm going to try to have a link to this article in the description also. I'm doing a lot of work here. That's why it's taking so long to put these video presentations out. I got to, hey, the rabbit hole is deep and I want to have enough information to quench the thirst of those who seek knowledge.
They found that the genetic risk for MS rose amongst pastoralists from the Pontic steppe and was brought into Europe by the Yamnaya-related migration approximately 5,000 years ago. They further show that these MS-associated immunogenetic variants underwent positive selection both within the steppe population and later in Europe, probably driven by pathogenetic challenges coinciding with changes in diet, lifestyle and population density. This positive selection was because the MS and RA-associated variants under selection confer some resistance to a range of infectious diseases and pathogens. So quite interestingly, this study basically argued that from an evolutionary perspective, that positive selection took place, positive genetic selection amongst the Yamnaya group for genetic variants that promote MS in a more prominent way, because these genetic variants basically protected them from different infectious diseases, which were obviously major issues thousands of years ago. Now, as we have seen, the ancestors of the Yamnaya people seem to predominantly be a group of hunter-gatherers that existed around the Don River region. But what else do we know about the Yamnaya people?
All right, so that was a very interesting video. I'm going to leave the link to his video, this video in particular, in the description. All right, so what are we going to go over next? We're going to go over the outcome of this Yamnayan migration and the effect that it had on Southeast Asia, Southwest Asia, the Near East, Europe, of course, India, etc. So thanks for tuning in to this part right here. So let's go over to the last part and see what was the outcome of this Yamnayan migration into Europe. I'm going to check out a video in regards to the outcome of Yamnayan migration. More specifically, the diffusion of Yamnayan culture from the steppes into Europe, Asia, India, etc. Let's go ahead and view this video.
The Yamnaya culture was instrumental in the spread of Indo-European languages and steppe ancestry across Eurasia. But what do we know about this culture? Who were the Yamnaya people? What did they look like? How important was the horse in their expansion? And did they commit a form of genocide against the ancient people of Eurasia?
Yes, they did, point blank. Now you know.
The Yamnaya culture, which is also known as the pit grave culture, existed from around 3300 BC to around 2600 BC in the Pontic Caspian steppe.
Keep those dates in mind. They will pop up later on this channel.
It was discovered in the early 1900s near the Donets River by a Russian archaeologist, earning the name Yamnaya because of the way they buried their dead. In fact, Yamnaya is a Russian term that means related to pits. They buried their dead in kurgans, a type of tumulus, meaning a mound of earth and stones raised over a grave. The dead were often accompanied by animal offerings, with the bodies placed facing up, with bent knees and covered in ochre, a type of natural clay earth pigment. Status played a role in burials, with some elite individuals buried with complete wooden wagons. The Kernosivsky idol is a fascinating thing to mention. This anthropomorphic sculpture was found in a village in Ukraine in the 1970s and is cut from stone. It is associated with the Yamnaya culture. Although its meaning is not clear, one theory argues that it depicts the supreme deity of the Indo-European pantheon. Similar stones have been found, and they're collectively known as the Kurgan steles, as they're found on top or near kurgans, and probably served as part of the mythology around death and the afterlife.
Do we know that for sure, or is this more narrative based on association? I mean, do they know this for sure? That's the question.
Now, there is an increasing body of evidence that the Yamnaya rode horses and were perhaps one of the earliest cultures to domesticate horses, with there being an increasing body of evidence that horses were domesticated somewhere in the steppe area in general. A 2023 study looked at 5 Yamnaya individuals from around 5,000 years ago, found in kurgans in Romania, Bulgaria and Hungary, and found that they displayed changes in bone morphology and distinct pathologies associated with horseback riding. The study added that these are the oldest humans identified as horse riders so far. This would make sense. We have to keep in mind the geography of the steppe. The steppe is a massive area of grasslands that stretches from Hungary all the way through Eurasia to northeastern China, the province of Manchuria.
Yeah, take note of what he's saying. Keep this image seared into your mind. Only because it overlaps regions, really. Asia, Europe, okay. And he mentioned Manchuria. I'm definitely gonna have something in regards to the migratory patterns of Manchuria and the original peoples there in one of my Asian presentations.
The Eurasian steppe has been described as a landscape of movement, with the rolling...
Let me rewind it back a little bit so you get the full idea. All right.
The geography of the steppe. The steppe is a massive area of grasslands that stretches from Hungary all the way through Eurasia to northeastern China, the province of Manchuria. The Eurasian steppe has been described as a landscape of movement, with the rolling grasslands encouraging further and further movement, and it would have been perfect for the horse. The Yamnaya were nomadic or semi-nomadic people, with some agriculture practiced near rivers and a few fortified sites. They consumed a protein-based diet which included dairy and probably ate meat, milk, yogurt, cheese, and soups made from seeds and wild vegetables, and perhaps drank meat. Given this high-protein diet, they were probably relatively tall and strong. They had a chiefdom system and ox-drawn wheeled carts and wagons.
Now, what he just said, that information was alluded to in the book, The Place of the Welsh. I've referenced that book plenty of times, maybe 3 or 4 times in some of my presentations. Let me rewind it back so you get the full thoughts. All right.
And perhaps drank meat. Given this high-protein diet, they were probably relatively tall and strong. They had a chiefdom system and ox-drawn wheeled carts and wagons. People of the Yamnaya culture are believed to have had mostly brown eye colour, light to intermediate skin, and brown hair colour, with some variation. Some Yamnaya are believed to have carried a mutation associated with blonde hair, as several individuals with steppe ancestry are later found to carry this mutation. It has also been hypothesized that a gene variant associated with lactase persistence, i.e. the ability to digest milk into adulthood, was brought to Europe from the steppe by Yamnaya-related migrations.
Did you get that? I hope you caught that. Don't fumble that fact right there. You know, blonde hair is a mutation. Lighter skin, mutation. Not being lactose intolerant or being lactose tolerant is something that developed, you know. Basically, you're talking about migrations and variations of people here and mutations, of course. Let's go ahead and proceed.
The Yamnaya culture is connected to many other cultures across Eurasia. These include the corded ware and bell beaker cultures of Central and Western Europe, with corded ware skeletons from Central and Eastern Europe having up to 75% Yamnaya-like ancestry in the DNA.
Hey, what you see on the screen, that's something that you can screenshot right there for a future reference or present day reference.
The Yamnaya are associated with many other cultures, however, including the Santashta, the Andronovo, and the Strubnaya cultures. They are also very similar to the Afanasyevo culture of South Siberia, and the populations of both cultures are genetically indistinguishable. This suggests that the Afanasyevo culture may have originated from the migration of Yamnaya groups to the Altai region, or alternatively, that both cultures developed from an earlier shared cultural source. Genetic studies have suggested that the people of the Yamnaya culture can be modelled as a genetic admixture between a population related to Eastern European hunter-gatherers and people related to hunter-gatherers from the Caucasus.
Yeah, so this is the rabbit hole that I'm experiencing here. When you get one fact, then it spins off into trying to get more information on these people. So, I checked out the Yamnayan people. Now it's split off into two people, the Eastern hunter-gatherers and the Caucasus hunter-gatherers. So I'm collecting information right now on these people, and we'll present it soon or in the near future.
And they're considered Western steppe herders. I'm going to do a full genetic breakdown of the Yamnaya and their origins in a future video. Before we move on to the question of genocide, it's important to note that the Yamnaya culture and its associated cultures are considered to be a major vector in the spread of the Indo-European languages across Eurasia, with now over 3 billion people speaking an Indo-European language, from Irish to Sanskrit in India. These cultures also spread steppe ancestry across Eurasia, and I detail this more on the video I made on Indo-European DNA that I'll link above. What I want to consider in this video, however, is how violent the spread of the Yamnaya and associated cultures was.
Alright, so when I'm doing these video presentations, sometimes people, they want to, they're coming from a good place, they don't know any better, but at a certain point all the world was melanated, then these people came in. Now, Europe and Africa at one point had similar cultures, but then when these people in Europe start interacting with different people, the steppe culture people, or the descendants of the steppe culture people over time after living in Europe, a different dynamic started occurring, a dynamic that wasn't in Africa like that. Africa retained a culture that was worldwide at one point, whereas Asia, Europe, India, etc., they were adjusting to these people, amalgamating with these people, adopting practices and ways of these steppe culture people. So that's one thing that Africa did not go over until many, many, many generations later. So, centuries later, during colonialism. So that's why I make a distinction between a melanated European, melanated Asian, and African tribes or people that's within Africa. Post-production audio. So basically this is a case of those who stayed within Africa and their descendants, and then those who migrated out and their descendants. People want to say I'm hating on Africa. Nah, this channel's too mature for that. We're above that, man. We're just making a proper distinction. That's all. Nothing more, nothing less.
The rapid spread of the Yamnaya culture and associated cultures across Eurasia has led many to argue that they potentially committed a form of genocide against the native peoples they largely went on to replace. One study sheds a little light on this. The study basically looked at the sex bias of two different migrations: an early Neolithic migration across Europe associated with the spread of farming, and a later Neolithic.
You know what? Let me go ahead and go back a little bit and make a better point. All right, here we go.
The spread of the Yamnaya and associated cultures was. The rapid spread of the Yamnaya culture and associated cultures across Eurasia has led many to argue that they potentially committed a form of genocide against the native peoples they largely went on to replace. One study sheds a little light on this. The study basically looked at the sex bias of two different migrations: an early Neolithic migration across Europe associated with the spread of farming, and a later Neolithic and Bronze Age expansion from the Pontic-Caspian steppe. They wanted to see if the number of males and females migrating from these areas was broadly equal or not between the early and the later migrations. This study used sex bias as a proxy to understand the nature of these migrations. If there was a relatively equal distribution of males versus females in these migrations, it would suggest a relatively peaceful migration of families from one area to another. If it was a male-dominated migration, however, it would be considered much closer to an invasion and much more likely to have produced mass amounts of violence, as who wants bands of men on horseback invading into your land? So what did this study find? Well, it found that there was no evidence of a sex bias during the early Neolithic migration. For later migrations from the Pontic steppe, however, they estimated a dramatic male bias, with approximately 5 to 14 migrating males for every migrating female. They found evidence of ongoing, primarily male, migration from the steppe to Central Europe over a period of multiple generations, potentially connected to new technology and conquest. What is beginning to emerge?
Alright, so to put that in layman's terms, what he's saying is the earlier migrations weren't so much of a invasion and genocide, but the subsequent migrations were chock full of ill intent, conquest, and genocidal men coming over, killing the native melanated European population and getting with their women. That's a tactic that's old, very old, tried and true method. So, I mean, you want to dominate someone, you kill the men, you get with the women, have children that identify with your way of life, and rinse and repeat. And pretty soon, what do you have? You have a population that looks like the conquerors over several generations. That's not a far-fetched concept, because we've seen this in pretty recent times. You see it in Latin America, you see it in Africa, you see, well, Australia, they went through it. In America, the US in particular, we've seen it. So yeah, that's all I want to say on that, and let's proceed.
Which is a picture of the Yamnaya and associated cultures, on horseback and in bands of young men, fueled by a high-protein diet, which meant they were probably relatively tall and strong compared to others, facilitated by a landscape of movement across the vast grasslands of the Eurasian steppe, galloping across Eurasia, wiping out many men who had probably never seen a human on horseback before going on to marry their women. When I read about the Yamnaya, I actually get vibes of the Vikings, in the sense of male-dominated migrations with violence into new lands. The problem is that the Yamnaya are thousands of years before the Vikings ever existed, and therefore we know less about the Yamnaya than the Vikings, although there is some parallels that are interesting to explore. But what do you think, however? Did the Yamnaya and associated cultures commit a form of genocide against the people of Eurasia, or is this unfair? Did they simply have better technology, a better diet, or some other advantage that allowed them to replace so many groups across Eurasia and probably serve as a major vector for the spread of Indo-European languages that over 3 billion people today speak? Please let me know in the comments below. But what do we know about Indo-European DNA? To find out, please click here. Thanks for watching, please subscribe and hit the bell.
Alright, so that was a pretty interesting, I guess, reaction to a very interesting video presentation that he's done. So I'll link this one in the description, my description that is. Hey, take it all in, teach or share it with others. So we've reached the closeout. We're done with this video presentation here. Stay tuned for part 2 of the Steppe Culture series coming soon. Take it easy, folks.